In a world of many gods, one man dared to worship only one. In the land where gods numbered in the hundreds, a ruler made a decision that would shake the foundations of the most enduring civilization the world had ever known. His name was Akhenaten, and his revolution would become one of history's most radical religious experiments. For over 2,000 years, Egypt had flourished under the watchful eyes of its pantheon: Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and countless others. While predecessors commanded armies and built monuments to their many gods, Akhenaten waged war against Egypt's own divine order, erasing the names of deities worshipped since the dawn of civilization. In their place, a single cosmic deity represented by a sun disk, Aten. What could drive a god-king to dismantle the very religious system that granted him power? Was it divine revelation or calculated politics? A stroke of genius or heretical madness that nearly brought an empire to its knees? The answers lie buried in the sands of ancient Egypt, in a story of power, faith, and revolution. Ancient Egypt's most controversial chapter, where one man's spiritual awakening became an empire's darkest hour. To understand the magnitude of Akhenaten's revolution, we must first understand the Egypt he inherited. By 1353 BCE, Egypt's civilization had already endured for 2 millennia. The mighty 18th dynasty had restored Egypt's greatness after foreign occupation, creating an empire stretching from Nubia, which is present-day Sudan, in the south, to the Euphrates River in the north. At its heart lay a religious system so deeply intertwined with the state that they were inseparable. Egypt was a land defined by its gods. The flooding of the Nile, the rising of the sun, the afterlife itself, all were controlled by deities who demanded constant appeasement through elaborate rituals. Chief among these gods was Amun-Ra, a fusion of the hidden creator deity Amun with Ra, the sun god. His priesthood at Karnak in Thebes had grown so wealthy and powerful that they rivaled the pharaoh himself. Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, ruled Egypt from 1391 to 1353 BCE during an unprecedented period of wealth, power, and international prestige. Known as the Magnificent, he maintained the delicate balance between royal authority and priestly power, commissioning massive building projects that honored traditional gods while glorifying his own semi-divine status. Into this world of rigid tradition and powerful priesthoods, Amenhotep IV, who would become Akhenaten, was born around 1363 BCE, likely as the second son, not expected to rule. Yet history rarely follows expectations. When Amenhotep III died in 1353 BCE, his son ascended the throne as Amenhotep IV. The early inscriptions of his reign show conventional piety, with traditional offerings to Amun-Ra and other gods. For the first year, Egypt's religious establishment likely breathed easy. But subtle signs of change emerged. In temple reliefs commissioned at Karnak, the traditional home of Amun-Ra, Amenhotep IV began depicting the sun not as the falcon-headed Ra, but as a disk with rays ending in hands, the Aten, a minor aspect of the sun god that had occasionally appeared in religious texts but never held prominence. By the second year of his reign, the emphasis on the Aten grew bolder. The disk was now labeled Ra Harakti, who rejoices in the horizon in his name of Shu, who is in the Aten, a theological mouthful that represented the first step toward isolating the sun disk as an entity unto itself. What drove this shift remains one of history's great mysteries. Was it a genuine spiritual awakening? A calculated political move to undermine the Amun priesthood? Whatever the catalyst, by his 5th regnal year, Amenhotep IV made his most shocking move yet. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of the Aten, a declaration of loyalty to his chosen deity that shattered centuries of tradition. The Aten was unlike any god in Egypt's history. While traditional deities were depicted as humans with animal heads or pure animals, the Aten had no anthropomorphic form. It was simply the sun disk with rays ending in hands, often extending Ankh symbols, representing life, toward the royal family. More revolutionary still was Akhenaten's theology. Gradually, inscriptions began to refer to the Aten not as one god among many, but as the only god worthy of worship. By year 6 of his reign, references to gods had virtually disappeared from official inscriptions. The culmination of this theological development was recorded in the Great Hymn to the Aten, preserved in the tomb of Ai, one of Akhenaten's officials. Its language reveals a startling departure from traditional Egyptian religion. O sole God, like whom there is no other. You created the world according to your desire while you were alone. All men, cattle, and wild beasts, whatever is on earth, going upon its feet, and what is on high, flying with its wings. Unlike traditional Egyptian religious texts filled with myths of gods fighting, dying, and being reborn, the Aten hymn describes a creator who sustains all life through light. The Aten didn't interact with other gods, because in Akhenaten's theology, there were no other gods. This exclusivity marks what many scholars consider the world's first expression of true monotheism. But there was a critical limitation. While all creation benefited from the Aten's rays, only Akhenaten and his family could directly worship this god. The pharaoh positioned himself as the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine, a theological innovation with very practical political benefits. In 1348 BCE, the 5th year of his reign, Akhenaten made his most dramatic move yet. He abandoned Thebes, the religious capital for centuries, and ordered the construction of an entirely new city dedicated solely to the Aten. He named it Akhenaten, Horizon of the Aten, though we know it today as Amarna. Built on virgin land in Middle Egypt, its location was supposedly chosen when the Aten's rays illuminated a specific spot between the cliffs on the east bank of the Nile. Boundary stelae marked the city's perimeter, bearing Akhenaten's oath never to expand beyond these limits. The texts explicitly stated that the land belonged to no god or goddess except the Aten, a direct affront to Amun and other traditional deities. Akhenaten arose with remarkable speed. Within 2 years, the royal family took up residence. The city featured sprawling palaces, open-air temples to the Aten, unlike the dark sanctuaries of traditional Egyptian temples, government buildings, and residential districts for the elite and commoners alike. At its center stood the Great Aten Temple, where offerings were made not in dark inner sanctums but on sun-drenched altars exposed to the deity's rays. The city embodied Akhenaten's revolution. No images of traditional gods appeared anywhere. Instead, the walls bore countless depictions of the royal family worshipping the Aten, receiving its life-giving rays. By 1346 BCE, Akhenaten had moved Egypt's administrative center to Akhenaten as well. His revolution was complete, at least on the surface. At the center of Akhenaten's religious revolution stood not just the king himself, but his chief wife, Nefertiti. Unlike previous queens, she appears in nearly all religious scenes alongside Akhenaten, depicted at equal size, an unprecedented elevation of the queen's status. She took the feminine equivalent of pharaonic titles and is shown performing religious rituals traditionally reserved for the king. Some scholars believe she may have eventually ruled as co-regent under the name Nefertiti. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters who featured prominently in the royal imagery. Their family life was displayed with unprecedented intimacy in royal art, showing the king and queen playing with and kissing their children beneath the Aten's rays. These intimate family scenes served religious purposes, depicting the divine beneficence flowing through Akhenaten to his family and, by extension, to all Egypt. But they also humanized the royal family in ways Egyptian art had never done before. Supporting Akhenaten's revolution were powerful officials who either genuinely embraced the new religion or recognized political opportunity. Foremost among these was Ai, who would later become Pharaoh himself. Others included the military commander Horemheb, another future pharaoh, and Panahesi, the high priest of the Aten. These men grew wealthy from Akhenaten's favor, building lavish tombs decorated with the Aten's imagery. Yet even as Akhenaten created this idealized world at Amarna, beyond its boundaries, trouble was brewing. The religious revolution may have pleased Akhenaten and his inner circle, But for most Egyptians, the elimination of traditional gods created deep anxiety. Ordinary people had relied on deities like Bes for protection during childbirth, Thoth for wisdom, or Hathor for joy. The abstract Aten, accessible only through the king, offered little comfort for their daily struggles. More dangerously, the forcible closure of temples didn't just offend religious sensibilities, it disrupted the economy. Temples were economic centers that employed thousands and distributed food during hard times. Their closure created unemployment and hardship across the country. The powerful priesthood of Amun, stripped of their influence and wealth, surely plotted in the shadows. Evidence suggests that despite official prohibition, many Egyptians continued worshipping traditional gods in private, hiding amulets of Bes or Taweret in their homes. Meanwhile, international relations suffered. Clay tablets discovered at Amarna, the famous Amarna letters, reveal a troubling pattern of neglect in foreign policy. Vassal kings in Syria-Palestine repeatedly begged for Egyptian military assistance against the growing Hittite threat, but their pleas largely went unanswered. In one particularly desperate letter, King Rib-Hadda of Byblos wrote, "Why have you neglected your land? Look, if there are no archers here this year, all the lands of the king will be lost." Whether distracted by religious reforms or simply indifferent to imperial concerns, Akhenaten allowed Egypt's international position to deteriorate. By the later years of his reign, around 1340 to 1336 BCE, Egypt had lost significant territory in its northern empire. As problems mounted, Akhenaten appears to have withdrawn further into his religious vision. The death of his beloved Queen Tiye around 1338 BCE removed one of his few remaining connections to the traditional power structure. Archaeological evidence shows the king spending more time at the North Palace, increasingly isolated from both his people and reality. After approximately 17 years on the throne, Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE. What followed was one of the most confusing succession periods in Egyptian history. A mysterious figure named Smenkhkare appears briefly in the records, possibly ruling as co-regent in Akhenaten's final years. Some scholars suggest Smenkhkare was actually Nefertiti ruling under a male name, though this remains contentious. Whoever they were, Smenkhkare's reign was brief. Power eventually passed to a young boy named Tutankhamun, living image of the Aten, probably Akhenaten's son, by a secondary wife. Only about 9 years old at his accession, the boy king was clearly controlled by powerful officials from Akhenaten's court, particularly Ai and Horemheb. These men recognized that Egypt could not continue on Akhenaten's path. Within a few years, they had orchestrated the most dramatic counter-revolution in ancient Egyptian history. The boy king's name was changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling the restoration of traditional religion. The court abandoned Akhenaten, returning first to Memphis and eventually to Thebes. Temples to the old gods reopened, their priesthoods restored. On a stela erected early in Tutankhamun's reign, known today as the Restoration Stela, the young king, or rather those speaking through him, described the desolation that had befallen Egypt under Akhenaten. The temples of the gods and goddesses had fallen into decay. Their shrines had become desolate and overgrown. The land was in chaos, and the gods had turned their backs on this land. After Tutankhamun's premature death around 1327 BCE, Ai briefly took the throne, followed by Horemheb, both men who had once served Akhenaten faithfully. Now Horemheb systematically erased all evidence of the Amarna period, dismantling Akhenaten's temples and using the blocks as fill for his own monuments. The names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and even innocent Tutankhamun were struck from official king lists. The heretic was to be condemned to non-existence, the worst fate imaginable to an ancient Egyptian. Akhenaten was abandoned to the desert, its mud brick buildings melting back into the earth. For nearly 3 millennia, Akhenaten's revolution became little more than a deliberately forgotten footnote in Egyptian history. Akhenaten might have remained forever forgotten had it not been for a series of 19th-century archaeological discoveries. In 1887, a local woman digging for fertilizer at Tel El Amarna uncovered clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform, the Amarna letters. This discovery led to systematic excavations by Flinders Petrie in 1891, bringing Akhenaten's lost city and forgotten revolution back into the light. Akhenaten's revolution teaches us that even the most established belief systems can be challenged by a single determined individual. In the empty ruins of Amarna and the defaced cartouches of Egyptian monuments, we see the deliberate erasure of a man who dared to reimagine divinity itself. In the end, the story of the so-called heretic pharaoh remains one of history's great might-have-beens, a brief, brilliant flash of religious innovation that illuminated the ancient world and then vanished, leaving only fragments and mysteries for us to piece together today.